And then don't disappear after the break because we have new slides on early Christian. And that might, at least one of those will be on the final. We don't start the final until 6:45, giving people time. Some people, just getting home from work or whatever, taking care of their kids. So I have a few announcements to make while we wait. There'll be some late joiners. There were last night when I gave the midterm for that class, as usual. So hopefully everyone gets here by 6:40, because I do intend to start the first slide at 6:45, and then we'll be done about 7:45. However, I've decided to give you guys a little bonus of an extra credit option, which is optional. You don't have to do it. And that would be a slide after all of the ones from the syllabus that are on the test. I mean, those 8 slides. After you finish with those, you can decide if you want to do one more for 5 points extra credit. It's a no-brainer. It will be a slide that I actually took of a real person in a real place, and I'll explain who that person is and what they were doing, where they were when I took the picture. Then you can decide if you want to write 5 or more sentences in a short story, and you don't get graded on, style or grammar, and there's no analysis and no dates or anything. It's just an easy kind of a, extra credit 5 points options to help you with your grade. Let me admit this next new person. Then I'll give you a little bit of, let's see, okay, hopefully everyone, yeah, that extra person just joined us. There we go. Yeah, here we go, another one. Okay. Yeah, we're just getting started for those who just joined us with the overview of what you should remember about the test. I sent you guys all an email. I assume you've seen it, which means you would have then hopefully either one of two things: printed out a hard copy of the test. If I were you, I'd do that anyway, so that you have that next to you when the slides are on the screen, so you can follow along where in real time. But don't forget, you have 2 whole days, a little more than 48 hours, to go back and watch the lecture again if you feel the need to double check your answers or revise them, or if somehow you missed part of the exam, and obviously some people's cases, they're just not able to take it tonight due to some conflict. So that'll be posted from Thursday evening through Saturday. Okay, yes, you have a question?
I got a question, Professor. So I printed out my PDF here, and I'm finding the 4th page is blank.
Yeah.
I'm just checking
Okay.
after slide analysis.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's a good thing that it's blank, but also good that you brought it up. That's extra room for you to write. If some of you are going to write more than 6 sentences about each of the 2 paragraphs, more than 6 elements, you don't have to get full credit. But if you choose to write, say, 7 or 8 or 9 of those elements on each of the formal analysis paragraphs, you might need more room. So that extra page is just provided as that for you. So anyway, I didn't finish the point. That's hopefully a clarification for everybody, that it's just extra space you can use. If we were in person, obviously you could do it on the back of the paper that I hand you, but we can't do that in this Zoom format. The other thing is how you write your answers. You have 3, well, in essence, 3 options. This came up last night. I think everyone was clear before the first slide hit the screen. You could, I prefer you to hand print, if that's what you choose to do, neatly. Please print large, not small. Some people print tiny little, size lettering, and it's hard to read, if not impossible, when it gets too small. So decent size, lettering, print, not cursive, if you're going to hand write the answers. The other choice is to do it digitally, and that would allow you either to, if you have the function on you should have it on your laptop, your PC, which is to digitally, it's called fill and edit, I think, or fill in and edit. It's an option that Adobe, I believe it is, that provides, which you would have had to have an app for that anyway, to get PDFs, download them, and send them to me when you sent your papers, right? Okay, so the point is you could do it digitally that way through the fill and edit function, on the PDF file that I'm sending you, or you could create a separate Word document and then forward it to me. You could take your time. Some people decide to write their answers, hand print it, and then they think that they might get a better grade, or they think of new information while they're watching the video over the next 2 days before it's due on Saturday. It's due midnight Saturday, okay, for everyone, for both classes. That is the cutoff. That's plenty of time. You guys got plenty of time to do the open book thing with your notes. Point is, you might want to go back and type in your answers digitally, even if you hadn't printed them. And this way, I'm giving you total flexibility as to how you put the answers into a PDF file, which must then be sent to markw, please, only, not the Outlook. We're getting so much stuff. It's every day. Of course, it's important stuff. Some of it's political, some of it's about social justice, some of it's about the COVID, some of it's about vaccinations and the budget, yeah, you know, and individual professors wanting to pop off on different topics. It's just overwhelming. So that's why I really need you to send all your assignments, as I've said many times this semester, including this test and the final, to my AOL.com. It's much easier for me to navigate.
Do we need to label this specifically
Yes.
like we did the paper?
Good question. Thank you. You guys, yep, are refocused. Yes, please label them the same way. Now, I didn't think to write, I mean, I didn't have time. I thought about it to write, you know, one of these things where you labeled the paper like this, but if I hold this up, it shouldn't confuse you. Obviously, you would change this to Art 1.1 mid. Yes. So to answer your question, let me hold this up on, yeah, I think we got another couple people joining us. As you never, okay, let me get to the speaker view. I guess that should, yeah, I held this up before. I'm glad you brought it up, but please don't write short paper if you're submitting your midterm. Okay, so I hesitated to show you this because I was so busy with so many late papers, questions, and midterms that are already coming in from last night's class that I had to log in, you know, and or send some of my readers. So in other words, yes, that's a good question. Make sure you label them the same way, except write Art 1.1 midterm, underline, last name, comma, first name. Yeah, the same basic procedure. So the file is clear when it arrives as to which class and, you know, who you are. Oh yeah, somebody's being helpful here. Yeah, as you can see, I did activate the chat function. April 14th. Well, I'm telling you that Saturday is the date. I put it in my email. I'm telling you now. I'm going to repeat it again in another email. If that happens, I'd be surprised, but it could be a typo, because obviously if we're giving a midterm in March, I'm not giving you a month to turn it in. So thank you for, if that's what you're saying. I don't, you know, have that part of the syllabus in front of me. I'll double check it. Why don't I? We've got a couple minutes before we start. I do have one more announcement about it.
She's just mentioning the paper.
I
Yeah,
was just
paper.
cleaning up for
Good,
Jen.
because I didn't think I made that big a mistake about the deadline for the midterm. Thank you for clarifying that, everyone. Okay, good. I didn't make that. I mean, every so often, you know, your mind slips a gear and you hit the wrong month, maybe, but I didn't do that, I don't think, on either of my two classes this semester. Okay, let me let in another person here. All right, so what's going to happen is the first, remember this is, we covered this last week. The first 5 slides you just identify, you get 2 minutes. Well, you mostly will be done in less than a minute, but you have up to 2 minutes to write the title, the name, you know, or if they know, if the last name of the artist is in the syllabus, but most of them are just the location. So the title, the name, or title, location or artist's name, and the year rounded to a 0. If it isn't already, many of these dates are obviously already ending in a 0. Those each will be up for 2 minutes. 5 times 2 is 10 minutes. Then I'll give you 5 minutes to do the true false. They're so straightforward that many of you will probably already done them, right? Because you should have seen your PDF of the test and printed it out well before you logged on. But I'll give you 5 minutes and then move on to 15 minutes each for the 3. Let me do this right. 3 slide analysis. Those are the short paragraphs, 2 paragraphs for each one. It's all the instructions are right on the test sheet, as you've noticed if you've looked at it. And I'll remind you of that right before you begin. And then I'll give you like a 2-minute warning before the end of each 15-minute segment for each of the 3 slide analysis or short essays. And then the last part of the exam is your option. You can, log off temporarily or, pause, whatever, and take a break early at 7:45, or you have up to 10 minutes where you'll see a slide that's extra credit. It's a brand new slide. It's not new. It's new for me to use it in this way. And it's really simple. It's not going to require you to rack your brains, and there's no analysis. It's just something you can choose to write 5 sentences, no matter what you write about that slide. If you give me 5 full sentences, you get 5 points extra credit. And then I'll pause everything for the usual 15-minute break, and we'll resume at 8:10. And we should be able to finish up a few minutes early. Last time we finished up like 7 minutes early. Depends on how many questions you have, but don't go away, please, after the break, because you will want to get the notes on the slides we're going to see, because at least one of those, if not 2, will be on the final. Okay, we are now ready to get started with the test. It's 6:45. So I'm going to hit share screen. Yeah, I need to let one more person in. Good timing. We're just about to start. We'll wait a few more seconds because it's 6:44. And then clear the screen with the first slide identification in just about 30 seconds, I would guess. Oh, yeah, here's another. Okay, you're joining us just in time. We're about to start the first slide identification. I'm going to give it until 6:45 according to the clock on my computer. I assume that that's accurate. Okay, here we go. So let me hide the thumbnails and let me make this full screen. And there you go. Okay, this is the first slide identification. Good luck. About 30 more seconds on this one. Okay, if you just joined us, this is the first slide identification. I've got to move on, but this is being recorded and will be posted for 2 days from Thursday till Saturday on YouTube. But we do have to keep to the time frame for those taking it now. Okay. All right, once again, this is the first slide identification. You're joining us a little late, but if you can just make a note of which one it is, or you can go back and watch it on YouTube. But we now need to move on to slide identification number 2 on your test sheets. I think you can all get this one, I hope. You have 2 minutes. About 30 more seconds on this one. Okay, slide identification and number 3. Okay, we are on slide education number 3. You can go see the first 2 you missed on the YouTube recording of it, which will be posted Thursday through Saturday. But this is number 3, so you should start right now filling that, identifying this one. Okay.
I think someone's mic's on.
Yeah. Mr. Rosales, I think your mic's on. You might want to mute that. Got another 30 seconds on this one. Okay. Slide identification number 4. Another 30 seconds on this one. Okay, slide identification number 5. Julie Martinez, I think your mic's on. It's making some noises, so I don't know if you could mute that just for the rest of the test.
Sorry.
That's fine. Thanks. About another 30 seconds on this, and then we'll get the first slide analysis essay question up. About another 30 seconds, I think, or less here. So. Okay. This is the first slide essay. And remember the three things on each of these next three slide analysis questions. First, identify it on the top line. This is all on the handout. You should have it, the instructions, but I'm just reminding you. On the top line, just like you did the previous 5 slides, you know, the way it was on the syllabus with the title, location, and the date. And then 2 paragraphs, please keep them separate. And for full credits, you need 6 of the 9 elements to analyze 6 at least of the 9 elements of composition for formal analysis. And then the other paragraph should be at least 6 sentences, not bullet points. That's not a full essay. In full sentences, 6 or more, if you choose, facts about the meaning. And you have just under 15 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning. Okay, good luck. Since you're just joining us, this is the first slide essay. So you just identify it and then write 2 paragraphs. One on the 6 elements of composition, formal analysis, and 1 about the meaning with 6 facts. Okay. About 2 more minutes on this. Okay. This will be slide analysis number 2. Same rules apply. You have 15 minutes. 2 more minutes on this. At 30 more seconds. Okay. This is the last slide analysis. And don't forget that there is an optional extra credit slide, which won't require analysis, no facts, dates, or anything else, just 5 sentences of your own making with no, grading for content or grammar, just any 5 sentences in a short paragraph about the slide. I will describe what it really is depicting. Will be available if you choose, but if you don't want to do that extra option, you can then take a longer break. But please be back at 8:10, since we will take our regular break between 7:55 and 8:10, and then resume with new slides that at least one of which for sure will be on the final. Okay, you have about 15 minutes. 2 more minutes on this. About 30 more seconds on this one, and there'll be the extra credit slide if you choose to do that one. Okay, this next slide is a real scene with someone from the real world, currently part of my family. This is an odd pose, I know. This is my daughter 3 years ago. Here are the facts. You don't have to use these facts, but if you choose to use these facts, I will state them clearly so you can maybe make a note of them, or you can just totally ignore them and make up a totally original story. I'll even give you a couple of suggestions, but the facts are, it's my daughter when she was 15. She's about to turn 18 next 2 weeks from today. Anyway, here she is in Chicago with me on our second trip to Chicago at the Field Museum, which was the first museum of anthropology and natural history in the United States. It's way over 100 years old. And some of these displays are about that. And this one, for instance, probably from the 1920s, is a section where there are stuffed animals of every mammal's species from around the world. And what she's reacting to, deliberately overreacting, is she's being a little goofy a bit, but she was wondering, why did they have to kill the whole family? It's bad enough they shot obviously the buck is the one with the antlers, the largest deer. And then they went ahead and shot the mother and the babies. So she's, sort of doing a animal rights protest gesture, but you could ignore that. By the way, her name is spelled Elena, Elena, but you can come up with another name. She is from Russia originally. We adopted her when she was 22 months old. So at this point, she was talking to me about the idea that, maybe I should start a cult and bring these animals back to life after dark when the museum's closed. Well, that, of course, was inspired by Night at the Museum, which that movie, right, or series, isn't it? 3 of them with Ben Stiller were inspired by both the New York Museum where they set it and this museum, because this museum was the first one in the US to do these kinds of exhibits. So anyway, she knew all about that, tradition of the exhibits coming to life after dark. She said, maybe we should sneak back in after dark and see if they come to life. Or you could just ignore all that and think of her as maybe she's some kind of a spy for Putin, who's obviously traveling under the radar, and no one would suspect her of trying to undermine American democracy from inside, or a Russian mafia courier with that bag she has over her shoulder, which actually had a camera in it, but you could make up anything else, or a high priestess of some strange Berkeley cult that can give magic powers to these animals and whatever, give them new life. Or aliens, anything you want. So I'll give you 10 minutes, or remainder of the 10 minutes. And then I'm going to pause the recording and you can take your 15-minute break, but be back at 10 after 8 for the second segment, which is the slides of early Christian art. Okay.
When did you say this photo was taken?
2018. And it was when she was 15 at the time. Yeah, she was in her Cara Delevingne, I think that's the actress's name, stage where she didn't pluck her eyebrows. She said that herself about when she saw this photo. And yes, I asked her permission to use it for extra credit in some of my classes. Yeah, it was the latest snowfall. It was 3 inches of snow in late April. Even in Chicago, that's rare that late. So she'd never seen snow. She didn't really grow up. What am I saying? She was born in Russia, but she was never allowed outside the orphanage. None of the orphans were. They were not allowed outside the doorway of their own building. So for her, it was exciting. And for the final, there'll be a slide of that experience where, the snow is covering the ground in front of her hotel. And she's doing some other antics differently than this. Anyway, so yeah, any other questions you have?
What museum did you say this was?
Field, the capital Field museum, you could look it up. It's one of the largest museums of natural history in the world. It has some of the biggest collection outside Egypt of Egyptian artifacts and mummies, and Roman and Viking artifacts, and all of these animals from all over the world that, of course, 100 years ago, people didn't think about that being taboo, to shoot the animals, stuff them, and put them on display. But the fact is, it's a way for, some science classes. Mine did when I was a kid going up there. Used to do field trips here and, take notes and then write papers about the different types of animals.
Where I work, we have an entire museum full of taxidermy for
Where's that?
in Petaluma. It's most of the pieces were donated by Hugh Cottings, but now it's kind of a mixture and we use it for education, even though he was a trophy hunter.
What's it called, this collection?
The Petaluma Wildlife Museum, and it's mainly made up of Hugh Cotting's personal collection.
Where in Petaluma is it?
It's on the west side. It's on the high school campus, actually.
Oh, okay. Petaluma, again, what's the name of it? I might check that out with my daughter sometime.
Petaluma Wildlife Museum. We should be opening up soon, hopefully with COVID
Yeah,
ending.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
open on Saturdays, mostly.
okay. Looks like there's a chat. Let's see if that's something that. Yes, all of this will be on YouTube.
What was the snake's name? I might know it.
Oh, that's an interesting detail. Well, let's see. Person may have already. Well, I got to get this off so people can still see the image if they want to write more about this. Another 4 minutes, and then I'll pause the recording. Pet snakes. One of my best friends is of Arab heritage, and his wife is Spanish, and their kids are my daughter's good friends. They're about the same age, especially their youngest daughter. And when we go over to their house, we always wonder, is it feeding time for their pet snake? Because they have a very large pet snake and they feed it live mice. It's not something I want to watch. It's nature. Oh, yeah. Twitchy. At least it's not itchy and scratchy like the two cats on the Simpsons, which is what my cat is all the time. About 2 more minutes and then we'll pause this. You can take a 15-minute break. Oh, the snake my friend had. I think it was a small. No, it's not a python. It's some smaller version of that genre of snake. It's not poisonous. He's had it since his kids were fairly young. Another minute on this, and then we'll take a break. And I am going to stop the screen share because I have to pull up the first slide. I want to not have you guys sit there when I fiddle around trying to pull up that file. So I'll do that at the beginning of the break, but you guys can take off and come back at 8:10. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording, and officially we're taking our break right now. So we're going to now proceed with the new slides for this first topic of the final that can be, I should say these slides are, excuse me, the first ones that could be on the final exam. By the way, I'll just mention it, brief passing. I just had my second COVID vaccination over the weekend and didn't affect me much at all, but somehow now 3 days later, I'm feeling some of the mild side effects, luckily mild dizziness and old fatigue. So if I occasionally talk a little slower or otherwise pause now and then, it's just, I'm guessing, due to that fact, but it's well worth it. I mean, I've not heard anybody I know, knock on wood, that either students, former students, or whoop, I met somebody else here. Anyway, anybody that I know of any age who has had their second shot, no one's told me that they had particularly bad side effects, but of course it's a small possibility.
I got the JJ one, the one shot.
Oh, how was that? Yeah.
For like 24 hours, it was like having a really bad cold, like chills and muscle ache, and then I was fine a day later.
Yeah, 1 to 2 days I hear is normal, but then it just depends on the individual. But my sister-in-law up in Washington, small town in Washington State, she and her husband, both retired teachers, and they both had a delayed reaction, and it was a little more consequential than what I can't complain, a little bit of fatigue, and I feel like I have a slightly hoarse voice. I think that could be a side effect because I know I don't have a cold or any kind of flu. So yeah, the minor symptoms, if they last at most 2 days, once in a while, into the third day, and then they're gone, it's well worth it. I recommend you don't let that cause you to hesitate or not get it if you have the opportunity as soon as you do. Okay, so let's get started with the notes for this second segment here on early Christian art. And what we're going to talk about are the things that are on the syllabus. Of course, as you see, the first one, this is the first one in tonight's list, but they won't necessarily be in the order the rest of them of the list the way it is on the syllabus, but this one is Arch of Constantine, Constantine, Arch of Constantine, Rome, and the date is 315. Now, from this point on, let me just double check. I don't think we have too many more slides that are with, yeah, well, we do when we get to, yeah, that's not quite true. We have a few more where there are, yeah, China and Mesoamerica. The dates sometimes have the letters, CE or BCE or CE or AD after them. But when there are no such letters, you can assume they're from the Common Era. That's what this is. Well, that's a very relevant fact because let's start with what it is. It's a triumphal arch. You remember we covered that, and that was one of the definitions I gave you during the lecture on Roman art. Triumphal arches are dedicated to a military victory. I'll say which one, but this is more than just another monument to a military victory. So what does it commemorate? Well, let's start with the fact that Constantine was a very important Roman emperor because he did several things that were new. The first thing he did was convert to Christianity. He's the first emperor to do so. Now, there's a debate on exactly when he became fully Christian. So I'll tell you the facts in a minute, but just there's no debate that he did before the end of his life. He converted to Christianity. So he became the first Christian emperor, and he won the victory that this arch is dedicated to over a rival to the throne, because he had been part of a triumvirate, with 3 Roman emperors sharing power for several years, and then one of them died, and that led to the combat. So just keep it simple and say he had to fight a rival, and when he defeated that rival, the night before the battle, he said later on, he claims he saw a giant fiery cross in the sky, which was his signal from, quote, the Christian God, however you want to say, from God or from heaven, to stop persecuting the Christians and convert himself. Now, he didn't do it overnight. It's true. He took a while. He never gave up his belief in 2 of the main Roman gods, but that wasn't uncommon for people who were newly converted Christians to continue to worship some of the old gods. So he did do that. So some people say, oh, that means he wasn't truly a Christian. Well, that's a technicality. He declared Christianity not only legal after he won that battle, but he encouraged people. He and his mother, who later became a saint, were responsible for building Christian churches all over the empire, including in Rome itself. And he had a priest say the final rites when he died, and he was baptized. So he was, a convert to Christianity. And also, when he won that battle, he let all of the enemy commanders go home in peace. And he said that's due to the new religious beliefs that he was now adopting, the new concept of mercy to your enemies, that at least, at some point, is part of what early Christian teaching, or at least Jesus talked about. And so he said because of his new religious belief, he would spare the lives of his enemies, and they would be allowed to go home in peace. And there's some evidence of that on this art. So in other words, to summarize, this is both a monument to a military victory in which Constantine took sole control of the empire and became the sole Roman emperor and the first Christian emperor, and also to religious tolerance, because his newfound religion told him, or he said, convinced him to show mercy to his former enemies and to stop the persecution of Christians and encourage the Christian religion throughout the empire. And then the other facts about him are part of the meaning of, this is who was Constantine, not just what the arch itself is telling us. He was the tallest Roman emperor at 6'4". And there is an image of him here. There he is. If you look closely, he's about a half a head taller than the other. And that's actually his head put on an earlier piece of sculpture. This is, of course, a bas-relief panel in the circle. There are a lot of these they're called medallions. Some people have different names for them. Stockstead calls them tondis. Medallion is good enough because that implies what we're looking at is some kind of symbolic event depicted symbolically. And this would be, there are two interpretations. One is that he's giving a sacrifice to his ancestors, which would be under the old religion. But a much more likely explanation, according to the historians I've talked to in Italy, is that he's accepting the surrender of his enemies and telling them they can go home in peace. That makes much more sense because we know that's what he did. So just say it's likely that this depicts the scene after he won the battle, totally unlike any other monumental arch or triumphal arch, I should say, where the victory is clearly indicated by the defeated soldiers being, captured, sold into slavery, or executed. So this is a very unusual monument, and it is a monument, therefore, to religious tolerance in that he converted to Christianity and he showed mercy to his defeated enemies. So he was not only the tallest Roman emperor and the first Christian one. And finally, the third fact, very important, is he's the one who created the eastern half of the empire. It existed before under Roman rule, but he split the empire. Well, actually, a previous emperor did that, but it didn't take. So just say he was the one who finally decided. There we go. Constantine was the emperor who finally decided to allow two separate capitals and the empire to split into two separate segments, Eastern and Western. And the Eastern half survived more than 1,000 years. We're going to talk about that in the next several slides after the fall of Rome. And that would be the Byzantine Empire, a very important part of world history that most of you don't know anything about, but you will by the end of this lecture. So just say he decided that the empire was too big to rule strictly from Rome. So he made a second capital, and guess what it was called? Constantinople. And speaking of Dr. Seuss, that was one of the lines in Hop on Pop, right? Is my dad can spell long words like Constantinople. Yeah, try spelling that unless you read it a lot. It is now Istanbul, which is now, of course, a city in Turkey, but it was the capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire, which soon became, after the fall of Rome, a new empire and was called the Byzantine Empire. So in other words, his influence on history is definitely a major, impact. Okay, and then we have the traditional images that all Roman, I'll back up and show you them. Whoops, whoa, that's an image of him as a colossal, which isn't a must-have. I took that off the list. So let's look at the whole thing here. This shows some of the generals that helped him win his victory, soldiers who were involved in the battle, and then angels. These are classical, images of Roman gods of victory. So it's even referring to the continuing belief in the old gods among most Roman citizens, not just soldiers, but the population. However, because he was converting, his mother and his wife converted, most of his family did. That set this example for other upper class, and then later filtered down to the masses, for eventually within his lifetime, the majority, at least according to most historians, of the citizens of Rome itself, he converted to Christianity. The emperor's converting, so that gave them a reason to. Now it looks like we've got, let's see. Okay, looks like all right, so you're talking about some of the saints here, right? And the martyrs, we could go into that all night, but we don't have time for the specific martyrs. So let's just say that he declared Christianity legal, to summarize it. And this is 2 years after he did that. He won this victory in 312. You don't have to know that year, but you need to know the year 315 is the year that this monument was created. And then a year after he won that battle and became sole emperor, he declared religious tolerance through as the law. He declared Christianity, not only Christianity, but all the other religions, Judaism, paganism, there was no Islam then, of course, and all the other religions within the empire, to be equally respected and protected. That's really unusual in the ancient world. That wasn't very common. So it was an advancement towards religious tolerance, his reign and that victory. And this commemorates both those things, the military victory and the newfound religious tolerance of the empire under Constantine. Okay, let's do the formal analysis. Well, I just did some reading before tonight's lecture, and I used to guesstimate the height of this based on when I stood underneath it and looked at people standing near it. But I was a little underestimating. It's about 80 feet tall. So for space, what you have is the real height, about 80-foot high, arch, or sorry, yeah, that's right. Well, monument, sorry, let's just say that 80-foot tall total height from the ground to the top of the monument. And then about a 45-foot high arch with two 25-foot high side arches. So the central arch is about 45 feet high and the two side arches are about 25. So that's the real space, but of course it doesn't end there. It's got techniques, obviously overlapping for the, figures, right, on these medallions and the victory angels and the generals at the top that helped him win his victory there. There's overlapping, of course, of the clothing over each of the bodies. All right, and then for color, it's a cool grayish white or off-white, you could just say. Definitely no warm colors. All of the similar textures on the human figures, and the angels of victory, whatever all the figures, all of those are done with carved line. Of course, there's no painted line. And there is carved line on the lettering, which is, I think it was something about the religious edict he passed, but it's not. It's a dedication of the Roman Senate in gratitude to him having won that battle and unified the empire. In other words, preventing another civil war or ending a civil war, just like Augustus had done 300 years, more than 300 years earlier. Okay, so we have a carved line on the lettering and on the human figures. So you made a texture on their hair, their clothing, their faces. The monument itself is almost entirely stable. The figures on it are, but the arches themselves are dynamic. Of course, almost everything else about it is stable. There is no modeling visible, very little here. And when there is, it's not a technique. It would just be the shadows created, of course, by the sun. The largest mass, well, it's really one mass. I wouldn't break it down into that. One large mass. It's totally symmetrical, left to right, but you definitely could say that it's weighted or unbalanced toward the top, which is unusual because of the empty space in the arches below the midline, right? There's the rhythm of the human figures and the medallions and the columns, lots of rhythm. And let's see, are we forgetting anything? Modeling, texture, space. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. So now I cut one of these off of the list, but I think you might find it interesting. It's not my slide. People wonder, who is that? Why did you? It's in the slide library. It's probably some retired SRJC professor or a professor's wife, who knows, touring Rome. But the point is, this used to be on my syllabus. I cut it down because we have less time after the test, of course, and we do need to move on next week to Islamic art. But I think you'll find this interesting. This is the Head of Constantine, which was one of the last three pieces that remains from a 45-foot tall colossal statue of Constantine that stood above the Forum, and it was found, the head and neck, of course, that makes it a bust, right? What's left of it. And then actually I should go back. You don't have to write this, just for your information. The elbow and a kneecap. It's odd, those three pieces, but the head is what most people would come to take a look at. It's in a museum just near the Forum. It's an interesting image. You don't have to have seen Caddyshack or any Rodney Dangerfield movies to recognize he has a Rodney Dangerfield look. I've had students point that out. But he did get respect, unlike that comedian. His eyes had that bulging look, and he had a particularly Roman, they call it, nose. And those, the eyes especially, and his height. I mean, 6'4" was really unusual back that far. Human beings have been gradually getting taller, over the centuries, pretty much around the world. Especially,
There's a photo of that statue someone took like at the base of it that's going around, and he
oh,
looks like a fish. It is very funny.
yeah, I think I might have seen that. Yeah. Well, anyway, there's a condition Eastern Europeans have. You don't have to add this. You've got enough information about who Constantine was, but he was born in what would be called Central Europe now, in what's now Germany, as far north of Rome. Well, no, as far east and northeast of Rome as you could get in the empire. And people in that part of Europe, not just Jewish people, especially people of Jewish heritage, often are born with, larger features, especially their eyes. And yet that may or may not be, what the artist is trying to convey is his power and his strength and his hypnotic gaze. Supposedly he could command a room or an audience of thousands of people when he spoke, which he did often. He was a very popular emperor. And no one tried, well, probably there was someone trying to overthrow him. Every Roman emperor had their enemies, but he didn't have much of a serious opposition after he defeated that one rival. And he died peacefully. I said he was the second longest ruling Roman emperor. That's already, so you don't have to add it. But that means he ruled for 32 years. That's pretty long. Okay, this is the next must know. And it is the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus. Say that fast. Sarcophagus of Junius Bassus. You've already spelled the word sarcophagus. Remember, that was from the first half of this syllabus, so you should know how to spell that phonetically. Again, my aunt in Indiana would always say sarcophagus with a PH. Of course, and Junius Bassus is spelled Junius, and then Bassus, Bassus, Rome, 359, and you don't have to write CE or AD. It's a common error. This man had been born a pagan. Now that's a word that you don't hear much. Well, yeah, you do sometimes, but back in the ancient world, it implied Christians calling anyone who wasn't Christian a non-Christian. In other words, the word they use is a pagan. So he was born a non-Christian or pagan, Pagan, of course. So you should make that fact clear in your notes, because this is very significant, this work of religious or early Christian art, because he converted to Christianity in his adult life. And as you may or may not know from just personal experience or knowledge from people you know or history, there's nothing as zealous as a convert, right? I mean, not always, but most of the time when you convert from either one belief system, one party, one tribe, one religion to a new one, you get really fervent, is a good word, right? You get very devout, you could say. So you could say he became a devout Christian, and the proof is right in front of our face. Every single panel on his sarcophagus depicts a scene from the Bible, every single one. And we're going to describe 3 of them. And these are, of course, high relief is a kind of bas relief. So technically speaking, it's not bas relief, but obviously these are raised figures off flat backgrounds, each of these 10 panels. So let's look at just the 3 most interesting ones up close. And these are the main notes you should take on the meaning. Whoops, I hit it. I always hit it twice. This central panel shows Jesus. You see how he's depicted differently back then, like a young Greek philosopher is what somebody said, or student of philosophy, with 2 of his disciples in heaven. So the scene in the middle, upper, just say one of the scenes, you have to say which one, depicts Jesus up in heaven. Literally, quote, I guess there must be a throne room, because there's always images, paintings later on up and through all the way through the Renaissance, showing either God or Jesus on the throne up in heaven. So he's in the throne room of heaven, flanked by, right, 2 of his disciples. But wait a minute, what is this? He's wiping his sandals on the feet, his feet, I should say, or sandals, say it either way, on the head of another figure, an ancient Greek god, Atlas. And you may know who Atlas was, but if you don't, Atlas, technically, he's not exactly like one of the main Greek gods, but that's getting too technical. You can just say a kind of Greek god named Atlas. That was supposedly, according to Greek mythology, obviously the ancient Greeks were pagans, they weren't Christians. They believed that someone named Atlas held up the sky. And that's what it's showing here. This is supposed to be the sky above our heads, and all the, the planets and stars and everything in the sky. And so it's symbolic of, the fact, anybody do the, symbolism here? If Jesus is wiping his feet on the head of an old pagan god, what could that symbolize?
Julius Bassus washing his hands, the old pagan god.
Say that again. I'm sorry, couldn't quite hear.
Julius Bassus renouncing the pagan gods and washing himself.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you're basically right. You could say it that way. One other way of saying it, yeah, you got the basic idea. But one way to write it just as directly as possible is it shows the superiority of Christianity over the old religions, or the dominance now, because there were still millions of pagans throughout the Roman Empire, even in Italy. But the Christian Empire was becoming now the dominant Christian religion, I should say, was becoming the dominant religion in most of, at least Italy, if not the rest of the empire. By this time already, that's not that long after Constantine converted. He had only died about 20 years before this. So yeah, but your way of saying it about washing, the Junius himself, the man who's, and he ordered these panels to be made, and he probably hired the sculptors before he died, and told them what he wanted on these panels, or his son might have. Yeah. So yeah, it is symbolic of the person themselves, this man, Junius Bassus. Yeah, you could say wiping his feet or his, washing himself. But I see more if it's a gesture of superiority or dominance of Christianity over the old religions, over paganism. Okay, let's look at another panel. Two more here. This is one that I love dissing, to be honest. It's once you know what you're looking at, it's almost laughably bad. Another fact about this period, this so-called early Christian art, another way of saying it, the two terms are synonymous, is late Roman art. From about 300 AD on, the quality of sculpture deteriorated by Roman sculptors, we're saying, throughout the Roman Empire. They were losing the skills that the ancient Greek and classical early Roman sculptors had learned. The techniques and the skill. How so? Well, it jumps out at you when you know what you're looking at. Let's start with the fact that they could not get proportions correctly depicted. Why? Well, this is a scene from the Bible where Jesus enters Jerusalem just before he was arrested and crucified, right? So just say near the end of his life, Jesus, according to the Bible, enters Jerusalem, and a crowd of onlookers climbed up into the trees to greet him. Well, this tree looks like a broccoli bush or something, but this guy is taller than the tree he's supposed to be climbing up into, which I've been to Jerusalem. The trees around some of the gates that are still there, they're not the original trees, but the same species, or, 50 feet tall, some of them, So in any case, that's what the Bible says. They climbed way up so they could get a good look at him coming all the way up the road, So this is ridiculous. I mean, this guy is way off in obviously the proportion of his body to the tree he's supposed to be at the top of. And then even more off is Jesus' proportion to the donkey he's supposed to be riding. That looks like just a large dog. He would crush that poor animal. You couldn't ride miles and miles on an animal that was that if you were that big compared to the animal, whatever it is. Supposed to look like a donkey.
Is there a known reason why the art skill deteriorated?
Yeah, it's an inevitable, what's the word? Centrifugal force. Somebody in some historian coined the phrase. I can't remember it. It's just the way of all, human cultures and, societies and, eras, that after certain number of generations or centuries, there's a loosening of standards of artistic, as well as, of course, some would say political and other scientific standards. But in any case, certainly within art, and I just keep it to that because that's what we're here to talk about. The training just fell off, and the old masters were dead, and so some of the students either went into other, or just forgot the techniques, or didn't take the time to teach them to their students. You can see it's just a slow demo, but you can notice right after 300, and some say it's because of the conversion to Christianity, but there's no evidence for that these artists didn't feel the need to make things look like ancient classical Greek, proportions. And if you think that's the last example, I'll show you one more that'll bring this point home really strongly. Adam and Eve, here we go. It's there's no one thing, but mostly it's just a slow disillusion is a good word. I think it's the right word, or diminishing if you prefer that word, of artistic skill being passed from one generation to the next. The standards were loosened and people were, less inclined to try and adhere to the ancient techniques. For instance, Adam and Eve here, again, they're supposed to be standing underneath, according to the Bible, right, in the Garden of Eden, a tree that towers above them. And then this snake is symbolic, actually, it's supposed to be actually Satan, the devil, who converted himself into a snake. It's supposed to be winding around the bottom of the trunk, and the snake is about as large as the tree. And then my favorite thing is, if it weren't for their heads with the difference in their hairstyles, you couldn't tell which one was the man or which was the woman. She's more buff than he is, or as buff at least. It's just showing bad skill, lowered level, or a diminish, again, is the best word, level of skill in portraying proportions of human bodies, of objects, and of people, and in the setting. So again, to summarize, the depictions of depth, right, or space, and proportions had deteriorated notably or noticeably by this time, by the beginning of the early Christian era.
What are the sizes of these figures? Like, how big are they?
They're about, hang on, I remember reading that, but hang on, just to be exact, because I have it pretty closely memorized, but I don't want to be off by, hang on, because I didn't think to look that up, but it'll take less than a second, assuming it's in stock set. Yeah, the whole thing is 4 by 8 feet. So these are clearly, I know they were way less than life size. Of course, it's a human body that's going to be inside this. Let's go back to the full view so that I can do the formal analysis. So it's 4 feet tall by 8 feet long. So each of these figures is about 18 inches. Yeah, each of these human figures, about 18 inches, which isn't even about a quarter of life size. Big enough though, it's at eye level, and it's somewhere you could go see. It's in the Vatican Museum. I saw it many years ago, but that's before I started teaching, so I wasn't really paying much attention to it. Okay, so we got the basic facts about the meaning. Let's now do the formal analysis. Now I need to tell you, this is an old black and white slide. It's what the slide librarian had to give me, and the actual colors don't show up here unless she did one more. No, she didn't. It's actually a pinkish color of stone. So it's really warm, but it doesn't look like that here. So I would give, if it's on the essay part of the final, you'll get, a pass on whether or not you look at it and think of it as cool, because in the photo it looks cool, but the actual color is a pink colored stone, which would make it warm. And then we have really, the one thing they still had been able to learn from their whatever limited training, these sculptors after the beginning of the 4th century, remember that's the 300s, from that point on, when you see the lowering level of skill, they still were good at simulated texture. Obviously you see that the carved line is used to create simulated textures everywhere on the hair, the clothing, and at least some of the objects in each scene. Each scene is almost entirely balanced. Look at them. The figures are, arranged across, left to right, and are about the same height. So they're roughly balanced, all 10 panels. And the only technique for space here is overlapping. The obvious rhythm is there with the arms, heads, legs, and the clothing. And then we have the modeling, of course, is part of the design, because that's what allows us to see the figures, the deep shadows created by, of course, if this is in a crypt, it's not going to have sunlight. At least I don't think so. It would be torchlight, right? But whatever lighting, just say the lighting creates the deep shadows, allowing us to see the figures. So there is modeling in this. And of course, along crevices of the robes, the creases, I should say, of their robing, the clothing. And then we have, there's no larger, smaller masses here that, you know, you could go crazy trying to say, oh, this guy's a little wider than these two. They're roughly the same. And it's almost entirely stable. Look carefully. The only things dynamic are, besides the tops of their heads, of course, are a few of the details. But even here with this donkey/dog, that poor creature that's being crushed by Jesus, it's still pretty much the body of that animal is mostly upright. So it's almost entirely stable. Okay, let's see. All right. Now, this is the next must know. It's San Vitale. It's like the word vital with an E on the end. San is, of course, the word for saint in Italian, S-A-N, and then V-I-T-A-L-E, Ravenna, R-A-V-E-N-N-A. Ravenna is a city in Italy, but you only need to know the city, Ravenna with two N's. 547. Okay, so what do we see here? We see now this, if I had, you know, if we had more time tonight, I would have shown you some contextual, you know, hand lettered terms that you might or might not, you know, there aren't on the list of terms to know that give you some kind of context. I try to do that at the start of each new topic, but obviously tonight's different because of the exam. So I'm just going to tell you this. And then, yes, there are a couple of terms to know from tonight, and I'll get to them literally as we go through this slide. Okay. But first, what is this building? It is a Byzantine or Greek Orthodox. The two terms in this period of history, they're synonymous. Today, you wouldn't say that. But if you know anybody who's Greek or Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, there's so many sub categories, it's endless. We'll just say back then, the two terms were synonymous. Greek Orthodox, right, with an O, of course, Orthodox, or Byzantine. I'll spell that slowly for you because that's an important word. And one of these slides, there are three more must-knows that have to do with the Byzantine Empire. And so at least one of them will be on the final, I guarantee that. Okay, Byzantine,
Is this
B-Y,
a photo or a painting?
is what? I'm sorry?
Is this a photo?
Yeah, it's a photo. Why? What?
Oh, because the date, and then I saw a car in the corner and I was confused.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I also see babushka lady. My daughter likes to make fun of that, even though that's from her culture. That's a Russian word, by the way. Some grandmother with a bunch of milk pails cycling past the church. It's fascinating. This must be a very old slide. The car, by the way, is one tip off. It's probably from the 40s, you know, long after World War II, maybe early 50s, even before my time. But anyway, the point is, here we go. I didn't spell the word Byzantine. You do need to know that word. B-Y-Z-A-N-T-I-N-E. B-Y-Z-A-N-T-I-N-E. Byzantine. Some people pronounce it that way, but everyone else I know pronounce it Byzantine. Who were they? Well, I hinted at them, but now if you didn't write it before, you need to know this now for these three slides, the meaning of these next three slides. That was the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which survived for over 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, meaning that empire lasted twice as long as the Roman Empire, which had lasted a little over 500 years. And they occupied, at the time of the fall of Rome, the whole Eastern Mediterranean shoreline, from Egypt all the way up through Turkey and all the way into the Balkans. I hope everybody knows the Balkans, right? That term. I don't know if you hear that much in the news anymore, right? That's the whole southern part, from Greece up to Hungary. Well, nearly, yeah. And that whole section of Europe and of North Africa and Asia Minor, it's called. Those were all territories or provinces under one ruler, the Byzantine emperor. So it's a pretty important period of history, this empire. So I see, looks like chat coming here. I always like to see if there's something. Oh, okay, you guys are, having it. That's interesting, yeah. Yeah, I have friends that are Greek Orthodox, and of course, I've been to Russia 5 times, and so you do see quite a bit in Russia. In fact, most of the churches there are Russian Orthodox, or just they call them Eastern Orthodox in general. Okay, the Byzantine Empire is only part of what the meaning of this is. The Byzantine Empire expanded. How did this get up in Italy? I just told you Italy's not part of the Balkans, obviously. It's Western Europe. Well, that's the important fact, most important fact about this slide in the next three. In the Golden Age, you could say during the Golden Age of the Byzantine Empire, the 6th century, that's the 500s, they had a ruler named Justinian. Again, one of the most influential people in the history of the world, and you probably never heard of him unless you study this period. He expanded the Byzantine Empire to, here's what you should write, to include 2/3 of the old Roman Empire, all the way to Spain. Look how far that is from Turkey. Remember, Istanbul is now where Constantinople was. So that's Turkey. That's all the way across the Mediterranean, a couple thousand miles. He expanded the Byzantine Empire and reconquered 2/3 of the Roman Empire. And he brought Eastern Orthodox or Christianity to the, quote, barbarian tribes that had taken over the Roman Empire after it fell. So they were going back into paganism, in other words, in Italy and Spain and North Africa. So you could say, reintroduced Christianity, but the right way is, because it was a different form of it, right, is the Byzantine or Greek Orthodox version or form of Christianity. So you just say he introduced Byzantine or Greek Orthodox Christianity. And the churches, of course, that are in that part of the world, wherever the Byzantine Empire ruled that century, are in that style. It's called the Greek Orthodox style. That's the last, an important fact for the meaning of this. So Byzantine, right, architecture, right, would be, here we go, on your list of terms to know. It's near the bottom of this page. 3 main features of Greek Orthodox churches. There's no definition you have to write here. You just need to know there are 3 visible features. You'll see them as we go through these next, 2 of the next 3 slides. This and one more. Greek cross floor plan. That means the shape of the church is in the shape of a Greek cross. And of course, a Greek cross is different than a Catholic cross. Right? You don't have to know the details. Just Greek Orthodox cross, they're shaped just like a Greek church cross would be. In fact, there's one right there. Let's get up close and you can see it there. So the shape of the building is the same as their version of the cross, the Greek Orthodox religious version. The cross is equal arms, if you want to know what that means, technically speaking. Each of the 4 arms of the cross have an equal length, not the Catholic cross. You know that, right? The crucifix that you see in a Catholic church is not like that at all. It's long, really long, with Jesus way up at the top. Yeah, it's a different shape. Okay, so Greek cross floor plan is the first feature. Then apses. Okay, these are the apses. And that actually is a term that I believe I separated. I separated it out because it's so important, but I've got the arrow on it. So here we go. It's a short definition. So if you want to flip the page to the top of the next page after the list of 3 features, you'll see apse, right? An apse is a semicircular extension along the outer wall of a church, a semicircular extension along the outer wall of a church, which helps support that wall, period, which helps support that wall. That's what this arrow is pointing at. But there are other apses that are not, that's obviously round. So when I say circular, I could have said circular or semi, yeah, I don't want to get that technical. It has a kind of a curve to it, or a multi-sided version. That one has about 6 sides, so that would make it hexagonal. That's a much taller apse. So there's 2 apses right here visible, and they help support the walls of the main building. And of course the dome. That's the last feature, and I think it's the most important and certainly the easiest to identify and remember. And this this will come up somehow on these three features in one of the slide essay questions on the final. I can guarantee that. The third feature is a dome on pendentives. I've already written that out, so I'm not going to spell that word. Pendentives means the dome is resting on the corners of the walls. That's radical. That is revolutionary. The Greeks and Greeks didn't have domes. Sorry, I meant the Romans never thought to do that. The Romans always put their dome on a drum, which is the old traditional, easy, simple way of doing it. And of course, they made some pretty impressive domes. You remember the Pantheon, right? They could make them pretty large, but not as big, as wide, as tall, and as heavy. They could not make their domes as tall, or as you could say, as tall or heavy as the Byzantine or Greek Orthodox churches, because these domes are resting on the corners of the building. You could just say the buildings. It's really where the walls meet. And that makes it much stronger. The domes can be much higher. This dome's maybe only 60 feet, but you're going to see one that'll blow your mind if you've never been to Istanbul or seen any movies set in the city of Istanbul, the Hagia Sophia. That'll be the most important slide tonight. Okay, that one will be, when I get to it, I'll tell you that again. That has a high probability of being on the final. This one may or may not be. But the concept behind what makes a Greek Orthodox church, those three features, is somehow going to for sure appear on the final. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is for now on this meaning. So let's do the formal analysis. Warm colors everywhere you look, right? Brick, warm reddish brick, and then red, absolutely red clay tile on the roof. The textures are all real rough brick, real smooth tile, and real smooth glass. By the way, the metal was added later by a later architect, I'm sure. And then we have the rhythm of the arches and the windows, the curve, even if this one is not fully round, it's rounded or curved outward. The apses there's others on the other side. If you were to walk around the other side, you'd see two more. So there's plenty of repeated shapes, the windows, the apses, so forth. And then we have the space. It's about a 60-foot high, large open, say it again, large open domed roof with about a 60-foot high ceiling. And then we have the largest mass is the main walls, and then the dome, because they're twice as high as the dome, and then the largest apse here, right? And then fourth largest in this photo is the smaller apse. It is dynamic on the apses and the dome because of diagonal or curved lines, and stable on the main walls, which are flat. And then we have modeling, of course, the shadows from the sun, and the lines are on all architecture. Lines are always visual. There can be carved lines. We know that, we've seen them, but there aren't any carved lines on this church, at least not visible here. And I actually pretty sure there aren't any anywhere. Let me see, space, rhythm. Oh, balance. It would be if you stood in front of it, the main entrance, and you saw these two apses on either side of this. The entrance is right here. So you'd be walking between two balanced flanking sets, right, of apses. So it is roughly balanced left to right, but unbalanced toward the bottom. Okay, let's move on to the next must know. This is the inside of that church, by the way. And I think this will, the next must know is actually inside this church, but this isn't that yet. This is the kind of decorative detail the Byzantines brought with them from Constantinople. And then they put this, said, here's Jesus, of course, and angels in heaven, and here he is down on earth. The sheep are representative of his converts, supposedly, right, listening to him preach. And now all get to go to heaven. See, they're climbing up the hill towards heaven. And then, of course, we have, various symbols like the Garden of Eden behind them here. And there's your Greek cross. Now, this one has a little longer base. I don't know why, because every other Greek cross I've seen is exactly equal arm. But this is an apse. Obviously, you see that. It's projecting outward from the main wall and it helps support that wall. And this is backing up now. One of the arms of the four arms or shape of the church, which is the shape of a Greek cross. But now this is the next must know. And this one has some very interesting aspects to it that don't immediately become apparent. But let's start with the title, of course, as always. This is the Emperor Justinian Mosaic, and that's Justinian is Justianian. Justianian. Mosaic is Mosaic. Location, well, it's inside that church, so it's the same city. Ravenna, Ravenna. And the date is 547. So, same building, detail of the interior. So you could guess there's some overlap with the meaning, but I'm going to restate some of the facts. This slide is one I'm not cutting from the study list, which gives you a hint that it has a higher possibility, I should say, of being on the final. The last Byzantine slide has an even more high probability. Let's see. I'm just seeing him. Russian Orthodox, yeah. I have many friends from that part of the world, yeah. Even before we adopted our daughter. I went to Russia 3 times prior to adopting Elena. And I'm in touch with some of the people there. Some of them have left and moved to Israel or Boston or LA or even the Bay Area. Yeah, anyway, Eastern Orthodox people forget. By the way, here's a quick aside before we get into this meaning of this. Anybody know, this is not something you have to write or remember for the exam, but it's just an interesting set of information that you could look up for yourself and verify if you so desire to do. Anybody know what the largest religious group is in the world? Organized. You have to say organized or formal religious.
Islam.
Islam?
People assume that, understandably, but no, it's not even close. Christianity is, but Islam is growing faster. So my guess is certainly within my lifetime, it'll probably, match and maybe surpass Christianity. But here are the numbers, and here's what you can check. The World Council on Religions has been around since the 1890s. They don't have a dog in the hunt. You know what I mean? They don't have a bias. They're all the religious groups send their representatives once a year to have conferences, and even during world wars they did this, and during pandemics. And then the UN Council on World Religions, a pretty objective group, again, with members from every country and every religious group. So they, share information. So you could, check some of this out if you care to. Christianity, depending on, of course, the fact that in countries like China and Cuba, Christians are not recognized officially by the government, but they're there. I've been to both countries and seen their churches. So there are tens of millions of Christians in China and probably about 10 million in Cuba. I've been with people even now they allow them legally to go there. And so if you add up the various subgroups, Catholicism is about 1.25 billion. It's the largest religious denomination. Now, some of you might go, well, right? Denomination is a subgroup of a religion. Okay. And then with Islam, there's Shia, right? And Sunni, and then some other more minor ones. But in Christianity, the 3 main subgroups, of course, are Catholicism, it's about 1.3 billion, rounding it off. And there were about 650 to 700 million Protestants. And then there are easily 400 million Orthodox. And then you have to add the new religions like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. Yes, they are Christian. They may be nominally Christian, but they basically have the same concepts of, the Christian religion. So when you add that up, it's about 2.8 billion people. 2.7. I'm slightly overstated. 2.7. And Islam is about 1.8 billion, and it's growing so fast that by, the end of the year, it'll be 1.9 probably. But that is almost exactly a 2/3 ratio. If you do the math, 1.8 billion and half again as large, roughly 900 million more Christians. So the two religions together are over 55, those two religions, the two largest, are over 55% of the world's population. Anybody know how many Jews there are in the world? I have many Jewish friends, and they often say, yeah, we know. Anybody? You want to guess? It's very small. It's not more than 20 million in the entire world. course, it'd be much more if it weren't for the Holy.
Religiously practicing or just
Yeah.
the ethnic group?
Self-identifying. That's a good
Okay.
question. Yeah, self-identifying. Because of course there are New Age people that think of themselves as no one religious denomination, and that's sort of where I ended up. Raised Catholic, but then I was, like many people, atheist and agnostic for many years, somewhere in the middle there, you know. And so yeah, it isn't 100%, you know, fixed, obviously, because people can move in and out of these groups. But Buddhism is a hard one to peg because it's several hundred million, but there are some sources saying that's only about 300 million worldwide. But, you know, a lot of people in this country, and I would include myself, really admire a lot about Buddhism, and some parts, if not many of the teachings of Buddhism can be incorporated. And even at the same time as someone who might have been raised Christian doesn't reject all of that teaching either. So when you do the you know, right, religious groups, it becomes more, you know, less hard and fast. But there's probably the third largest religion would be Hinduism, because there are nearly 1 billion Hindus in just India, and at least 100 or 200 million more in Asia outside of India. And then it would be Buddhism would be fourth. Okay, let's talk about the meaning of this one. Speaking of various religious subgroups. Okay, here we have a mosaic, and that's our next definition. And this is a really short one, mosaic. A mosaic, okay, here we go, is a two-dimensional work of art made up of thousands of tiny pieces of colored glass, period. Again, it's a two-dimensional work of art made up of thousands of tiny pieces of colored glass. The Byzantines were the greatest mosaic artists of the ancient world. Nobody argues with that. They perfected that medium, right? The word is medium of art. They also were very good fresco artists, but they were even better mosaic artists. So this is a mosaic. The meaning on this one is on the walls of San Vitale, a Greek Orthodox church in Italy, which after all was reconquered, remember, by this guy, the emperor. There he is. If it's not obvious, the entire scene is named after him, this whole mosaic. Justinian. He not only expanded the Byzantine Empire and reintroduced Christianity to the entire greater Mediterranean, he also, these are facts about the meaning of this, who was he? He also was the head of the Byzantine church. You see, he's got both a halo, meaning he's a holy figure, and a crown. That's not typical in most other parts of the Christian kingdoms or Christian world, if you want to call it that, at that time. And even now, there are some people who claim both to be head of both the church in their country, whatever the dominant religion is, and the government. But it was the given with the Byzantines. They believed that was the proper role of the emperor. However, he was a bit busy running an empire of, 100 million people and, 40 or 50 different provinces. So he turned over the daily running of the Byzantine church to the patriarch here, or some would call him metropolitan, but that's more of a local term for Orthodox, bishops. So we could just say patriarch with a capital P. It's not like the Pope. If anything, he's closer to being the Pope. So they divided a little bit the task. And this guy, you see the Greek cross he's wearing, or he has on the sash there. Well, he's wearing it, yeah. This guy ran the daily business of the Byzantine church, while the emperor mostly focused on running the government. Okay, and then we have his advisors. It would be like a cabinet today, right? I mean, right? His inner circle, if you want to call them that, but the right word would be his advisors. They're actual part of the government. They're not just people who occasionally gave him advice, right? They were his, circle of advisors, government officials, civilians, of course. And then obviously these guys ain't civilians. This is the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the heads of the branches of the Byzantine military. But you might say, wait a minute, Byzantine branches? What do they do? All they had was, right, the infantry and maybe the cavalry. Oh no, they had a navy, and they had a kind of artillery division. They were obviously they had to be very effective as an army to reconquer in one man's lifetime. Well before Justinian died, they'd done that, reconquered a good chunk of the old Roman Empire. literally 1,000 miles or more away from their capital. So they had the most advanced navy and artillery. They didn't have gunpowder yet, no, but you don't need to know the details. But they had techniques for winning battles that no other army at that time, at least in the Western world, had ever devised. And so these guys were his military advisors, the heads of his various branches of military. Okay, and it's classically Byzantine, to finish up the meaning here, because it has a gold background. That is real gold, right? Painted onto the glass. And here are the features that mark it as Byzantine style mosaic. A gold background and bold outline around the main figures. Yeah, you notice that everywhere. And then rather stiff formal poses. They even look like birds perching on a wire, someone said, but the wire is down here, right? So that may be less realistic, but everything above their feet is quite realistic, including their details of their face, their hair, right? Whoops, sorry. I have to adjust that. But then that's pretty much the whole meaning, right? Again, it's on the wall of the Church of San Vitale, a Greek Orthodox church in Italy. Okay, but there's a mystery of history here, and I'm going to see if anybody spots it. Who do these 4 lads look like a little bit? From a certain country across the Atlantic that conquered the American pop music scene and became the most successful rock and roll band in history. But he noticed that they look a little
The
like
Beatles invading
Yes,
your
and
homeland.
the-
Oh no.
right from the cover of the White Album, 1968. I had a student mention that one of my first semesters I ever taught here, and I can get on my head ever since. Yeah, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. What are they doing back in the Byzantine Empire? Did they take a time shot? I just don't write that and don't put that if it's on the essay part of it. But it is ironic. They really do have a strong, especially, Paul and George here, maybe a little less so Ringo. Well, his nose sort of fits in, and John looks a little upset. Yeah. So it's just an odd coincidence, a mystery of history. Anyway, back to the serious finishing up on this. And then there's, like I said, one more totally major slide coming up that you want to take very thorough notes of. We have 2 more must-knows, right? I'm not sure if we'll get to the St. Basil's. I can't remember if I was able to insert that slide before the semester started. I've been so busy since the lecture started. If it isn't here, then it's in another file. So we may end up doing 3 more slides, but we'll go quickly through 2 of them, and one of them we'll linger on. Okay, wrapping it up on the formal elements here. We have balance, of course. He's in the middle. He's the largest figure, so he's the largest mass, isn't he? And then it would be the patriarch here, because you could see all of their figures, but not quite all of the others. Okay, and then I don't know, you decide what the 3rd largest mass are. It is full of the rhythm, of course, of their bodies, their heads, arms, robes. The symmetric texture is superb. That's what makes the Byzantines such great mosaic artists. And that's on the robes, the hair, the clothing, John, Paul, and George's faces. And of course, the modeling, I already said that, but again, you should have that on the formal elements, is very strong, and there are thick or bold, is a better word, but use either word, bold or thick outlines around all the main figures, even around their heads, I would say. It's got a warm background and then cool on the main figures, the purple and white robes, except for his halo. And he's carrying, it looks like a bowl of gold, and one of the priests, I guess he's a priest, or no, advisors, is carrying what looks like a Bible. But then these figures are a mixture. There's some warm colors on part of their uniforms. The shield, though, is a cool green, of course. But their faces and their hair, the skin and their hair are warm, of course, earth tones. The only technique for space is overlapping. It is almost entirely stable. The only things dynamic really are the tops of their heads. Even their arms are at right angles. You see that. Oh, and the shield, I guess you could say, yeah. And I mentioned the rhythm. Yeah. Modeling, texture, balance. Okay. I covered everything. All right. This is the icon, right? The next must know. Icon of Virgin and Child from Istanbul, 1100. All right. So an icon, that's our last definition for tonight, is a sacred image with one or more of the following figures. You could say that includes one or more of the following figures. Mary, mother of Jesus, right? Mary, Jesus, God and or holy figures. I'll say it again. The four possible types of figures in an icon are Mary, Jesus, God, and or other holy figures. And here these are saints, archangels, they're called, right up in heaven, supposedly mentioned in the Bible. They're looking down, of course, at Mary, who is looking at her baby. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but when I look at this, I can't help thinking this looks like a miniature 30-year-old man with a bad haircut. It just
He's a little man with a bowl cut.
yeah, it's terrible. But this is a period when art, like I said, it continues through the Middle Ages, and then the Renaissance, everything goes back, of course, up in quality because they rediscover ancient techniques and, of course, invent new ones. Those Italians, back in the 1400s, but that's hundreds of years in the future. So by this time, painting and sculpture had really fallen in skill and realistic detail. So, for instance, there's the not so lifelike image of a so-called baby or even a toddler. It doesn't look like either on her lap. He does look like a miniature man, 30-year-old man. And then we have the skin tone. That's another part of the meaning. What's going on? Are these two figures dead? Their skin looks almost like dead flesh. Well, I don't think that's necessarily, it's certainly not a deliberate effort to make them look dead. There's two explanations, or two theories, why the skin tones on medieval, not just icons like this, but any medieval painting, European medieval painting, tends to have a deathly or greenish cast to the skin tones because either the paint, the impurities in the paint when it was first made, the actual painting originally might have had these colors. We don't know. Of course, there's no color photography from that far back. So it could be they started out looking like this because the impurities in the paint, or it could just be they aged, deteriorated the chemicals in the paint over the centuries. Either way, it's not very lifelike flesh tones. And then she's sitting on a throne that looks like, what does that look like? Something we just covered at the
Like the Colosseum?
Yeah, the Colosseum. Now there was one in Constantinople. Every big Roman city had one, but in Constantinople, because it began as a Christian city, since Constantine founded and he was Christian, there was no blood sports. No blood sports. It's in ruins now, just pieces of rubble. And the foundation of it is, you could see it actually. You're going to see my slides of Istanbul, I think, next week. Yeah, we'll have time for those. It's a fascinating city. And I'll show you where the ruins of this Colosseum were. So this shows Mary, mother of Jesus, looking down at her so-called baby son, sitting on a throne, supposedly in heaven, right? Symbolized by this Colosseum, which would have been a non-gladiator type venue. It would have been for non-violent religious events and entertainment, public entertainment of non-blood sport type. And then two angels looking down on them from above. But it is clearly Byzantine because look at the gold background. All icons, whether they are Mosaic, Byzantine icons, and then other countries. You go to Russia, you see this. You go to Egypt, where there are 12 million Christians in Egypt, and they're mostly to get along very peacefully with their neighbors. I don't know about the rest. It was nice to see the Pope go to Iraq and bring together two of the world's major religions. They were really reassuring, and they really do want to have, peace between the Muslim and Christian population. And Christians, of course, have dwindled, but there's still several 100,000 of them in Iraq. I know people of Iraqi Christian backgrounds. Some of them have decided it's safe to go back, at least temporarily. So anyway, there's hope sometimes in the world. So this gold, though, it's an important last fact about the meaning, is a typical Byzantine feature, as are the bold outlines, right, around the figures, right, and the sort of stiff formal poses. We saw that with the mosaic of Justinian. Okay, formal analysis. It's balanced. She's in the middle, although because of him being on one side, but I think her shoulder, it's roughly balanced left to right. Depending on where you draw the line, you could make the case that it's bounced top to bottom too, but there is some empty space behind her head. So you could say it's weighted or unbalanced toward the bottom. Obviously, there's the rhythm of the arms, heads, and of course, this Colosseum-like throne. There's not much simulated texture except on, and not very realistic on the hair and the skin. I guess to somewhat on degree on the angels as well, but there is some on the robes, but it's not very sharp and realistic. There is modeling on both the robes and their faces, of course. The colors are warm on her outer robes and blue on her inner robe, which are symbolic of her being Queen of Heaven. Blue is the color of royalty. And gold, of course, is the background is all warm, and it's a mixture of warm and cool on the angels. There's bold outline I already mentioned around these figures here. For space, I don't see, this isn't foreshortening. Not at all. It's not at all realistic. So it's only overlapping. And the largest mass is her, then the throne, and then I guess the baby / grown-up Jesus there. Okay, now we get to the most important slide of tonight. And I'm going to go ahead just to double check. Yeah, we're going to do next week, or we'll come back to it, St. Basil's, because we want to end slightly early. But don't stint on your notes for this one. It has a very high, I will even say, probability of being on the final because it's such an important site. Has anybody here been to Turkey, to Istanbul? I rarely get students who have. But you know how many movies, not just Liam Neeson's Taken series, but a whole bunch of other movies have been filmed here. Pierce Brosnan's been here. Sean Connery in one of the first, I think it's From Russia with Love, yeah, which is a title that I can relate to based on my daughter's adoption. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of movies for decades have been filmed in this building. Western movies, you know, European American and others too. It's an iconic site. Okay, so here we go. This is the Hagia Sophia. That's how you would say it correctly. But if you're from Indiana, like my dear late aunt, she would have called it Hagia, Hagia. Second word, Sophia, Sophia. That means Saint Sophia, or the highest, Sophia of the highest, meaning named after a saint of the Greek or Orthodox or Byzantine religion. So Hagia Sophia, the architects, yes, you need to know the name, are Anthemius, Anthemis, and Isidorus, Isidorus. 537. Okay, this was the mother church of the Byzantine religion. Some would equate it to St. Peter's in Rome, but St. Peter's didn't exist for 1,000 more years. So here are the facts. There are so many. I'm just going to hit you with the main ones, but you should have these in your notes about the meeting. Okay. Oops, sorry, someone, just in case it's relevant to this topic here. Oh, Beals, yeah, right. Again, I'm going to say it quickly because it's on your syllabus, right? Hagia Sophia, Anthemius, and Isidorus. Now, you can look at your syllabus for the spelling if you need to. We need to keep moving here because I don't want to stint on the notes that you should have. Why I'm saying this is such an iconic structure, well, not just me, people around the world would say that. First of all, it was the largest domed building ever built in the ancient world. I'll say it again, the largest domed building ever built in the ancient world, much larger than the largest Roman dome building, which we saw before, the Pantheon. How big is it, you may ask? More than 40 feet taller. The dome is over 100, or just round it off, about 100, or you say slightly over, 180 feet tall, and near or about, again, about 180 feet wide. That is a massive dome, and it is the original dome. Now, it's had to have repairs because there are a lot of earthquakes in Turkey, so small sections of it have cracked and had to be replaced, but it's the original concrete dome. And it's resting on pendentive, so this has all three features. If it's on the essay part, which has a high possibility of the final, you would want to mention as part of the meaning 3 facts, and you got 3 of the 6 sentences right there. There's the pendentives. That's the corners of the building. And this is the part, see what a pendentive is really the joining section that goes up to support the dome. I did mention before because you couldn't see it on the exterior of that San Vitale church slide, but here you can. So the dome is supported on these Pendentives. Of course, it's in your terms, list of terms, on these pendentives, which themselves are supported on the corners of the walls, or you could just say the corners of the building. That's such a strong support system that you could make this dome more than 40 feet taller, or about 40 feet taller and wider than the largest Roman dome. So again, that's what makes this would make it possible to make this the largest dome building ever built in the ancient world. And then you have the fact that it has pendentives on pendentives. See these here? These, of course, are fairly large pendentives, but they support an even larger pendentives, and all of that helps support, of course, again, the dome up above. Another feature that makes it Greek Orthodox is the forearms of the cross. Well, there's sections that go off on the side here. You could probably tell from the, obviously from the shadowing here. It's got the forearms of the cross. If you were to stand in the middle, you'd see it's shaped like a Greek cross, of course. And then you have the apses. So all three features I already gave you in that list of the three main features of Greek Orthodox churches. But it has several other features that none of the other Greek Orthodox churches have. These are Roman columns, 40 feet tall. And look how they're dwarfed by the height of the wall that they help support. They're 40 feet tall from ruined Roman temples, or abandoned, you could say. Maybe they took them from temples that weren't even ruined. But anyway, they were abandoned Roman temples that had been pagan structures before the Byzantine Empire. And then these are columns that also were taken from other Roman temples, and they're about 20 feet high. So just that 2 rows of columns, 40 feet and 20 feet, not to mention the space in between, that's over 60, say 80 feet between here and there. And look how it's dwarfed. You can't even see the dome goes, you'll see my own slides next week, looking straight up at the dome. It's breathtaking. So that's just the bottom of the dome, in case you think that the whole dome ends right there above the screen. No, it keeps going up above your head. Okay, and then we have the fact that there are frescoes and mosaics, which the Byzantines were good at, remember both, of Christian saints, well, no, not saints, holy figures. They didn't use the word. Well, yeah, they did. You can say saints. That's right. This is Saint Sophia Church. But there's also Islamic prayer shields. Now, how did they get there? Well, you probably know if you know anything about Turkey. The Turks conquered Byzantium, or this city, and converted it into what's now Istanbul, as one of what was then the capital of the Turkish Empire. And when they did that, they converted this Orthodox church into a mosque. However, they put those symbols here. You can see them, right? Those are Arabic prayers, right? Or Islamic prayers in Arabic. But they didn't force the Christians to stop coming, or prevent them, I should say, from coming. They allowed them to come on Sundays. They were allowed to continue worshiping on Sundays. Not to have all the religious ceremonies they wanted, on certain holidays, but at least their main worship day was allowed to continue. And that's pretty enlightened. Plus, the Sultan, when they conquered this city, had his soldiers were starting to scrape away all the Christian symbols, and he said, stop, leave them. Let's not desecrate what was here before we came. So you see some damage, but they aren't removed totally. So again, relatively enlightened. Well, that's 1100 years after Constantine showed his enlightened policies. But for, the total ruler, the Sultan of the Turkish Empire, do whatever he wanted. It was then the largest empire in the Western world. The Turkish Empire was huge. And he could have just done anything he wanted, but he chose to leave some signs of respect for the previous religious entities. The previous religion that had built the church. And then finally, maybe the most amazing fact of all, and I will do a quick form analysis, and I guess we're just about on time, but I will stick around for any questions you might have about grades, extra credit, or any other topic we covered tonight. Okay, last thing about I think it's the most amazing fact of all, the entire structure, this huge, each arm is, I forgot to mention, the equivalent of a city block. in length, not, very long city blocks, but, in small, old historic neighborhoods. I've walked all over Istanbul. It's about the equivalent of an average city block in the city it's in. 4 blocks of city space encompassed under one building. Okay, but the last fact, most amazing, I think of all, the entire structure from the foundation to the top of the dome was finished in 5 years. Compare that to the Bay Bridge, which isn't even half of the bridge that it was damaged in the Loma Prieta quake and cost what, $7 billion, and it's already rusting. I wouldn't want to be on that bridge in an earthquake above 7.0. It'll probably collapse. We can't even come close to matching the skill of the ancient world when it comes to their greatest works of architecture. To me, that's the most amazing fact. Okay, plenty on the meaning there. You wouldn't have to remember all those facts if it's on the essay part of the final. But those are the facts you should have in your notes. Okay, let's wrap it up. It is balanced, clearly. I mean, it's symmetrical, 4 equal arms of the cross, an equal number of apses on each end, at the dome right in the middle. The largest mass is the dome, but you can't see that from here. So in this slide, you could say it's the main apse if you look at it, because it incorporates the smaller apses. And then I would say, if you count this as one mass, see, it's up to you. Is that one mass? Well, then that would be larger. And then the main apse, and then the 3 smaller ones. Okay, and then we have for space, I already mentioned, it's the equivalent of 4 city blocks capped by a dome that is over 180 feet tall. And of course, that's real space. And then there are the warm colors on the upper walls and the cool colors on the columns, and it's marble, of course, on the lower half of the walls. The rhythm is obvious with the arches, the columns, the frescoes here, the decorative details, right, and the saints and angels on the walls. The modeling is the shadows from the sun. You see them coming into the windows. And then it is dynamic on the apses and the windows and the dome, of course, and stable on the columns and the outer walls. The textures are real, smooth textures of marble and plaster. And you could say they're similar textures, but you can't really see them from here on these frescoes. These are frescoes or mosaics. There are some similar textures. The lines are both painted on those frescoes, some of the details. And of course, on these shields, those are painted lines. But most of the lines on the structure itself are visual lines. Okay, and I think I've covered everything. Color, texture, mass, modeling. Yeah, balance. All right. Right now, we just finished on time. So thank you all, but I'm going to stick around. If you have any questions, now's a good time to ask about. Don't forget that you have until midnight to turn the test in, but I'm not going to be up at midnight deleting it. I am going to delete it at probably, I said 48 hours, so I'll probably make it like 8 or 9 on Saturday night. That's more than 48 hours. It'll be posted from 7 p.m. on Thursday. You'll get an email to remind you of this. For those who missed the beginning or want to go back and check your answers. But please send it in by midnight on March 13th, Saturday, if you want to get credit. And that would be as a PDF, of course, and make sure you identify it correctly. And if you just joined us late, that means like you did your papers, you would write Art 1.1 Midterm / last name, first name. Okay, so that you all have the same consistent way of my identifying which test and which class you're in, so I can log them in correctly. All right, and
I have a question about the essays that we turned in, or the writing assignment.
Yes, I was about.
Are we going to get a grade back on that, or is that?
Oh yeah. I've gotten about a third of them back, and I'm anticipating getting. Oh, I know I'll get back at least 2/3 of them. And then I have to make an executive decision. One of my readers is dealing with her fiance almost died. Had to go to the emergency room. So I got to give her a break on the timing of how long it'll take her to finish her set of, for the ones I graded, of course, are done. So it may be 3/4 of them are done. And I guess I'll take a consensus by the start of the next class, because then we have spring break, as to whether I should just give people the grades from the ones that were turned in. And if you don't get your grade right away, it might be the start of spring break before a few of you wouldn't get yours. I like to do them all at the same time for each class, so no one feels like they got left out. That's how I try to handle these things. At least the ones turned in on time, but I've gotten some late ones, and those I can't promise will be graded by next week. So I should be able to return either all or nearly all of them next week. And I'll probably, unless people object, right, I may even send you an email. Well, I can't take a poll by email. It's too difficult. So I just probably make an executive decision. And if it's okay with people, anybody want to object, you should speak up now. You may or may not be one of the ones whose exam gets returned by the last reader who's going to get to them this weekend. Actually, that's from what I understand. It's not typical. It's a person who's been totally reliable and is not someone who doesn't step up to their obligations. But when the person you're planning to marry is nearly dies, and you have taken the emergency room and then take them back for treatment afterwards. It kind of sets you off course a little. So I'm going to have to defer to the fact that about a quarter of the exams probably won't be ready to return next week. So if everyone's okay with it, I'll return your grade. I'm not going to return the exams themselves, but your grade and an explanation of how you got your grade. Now, if you get an A, it's an A. You'll just get a congratulations from me and the exact points you got. An A, A 90, 95. I mean, those are all clearly excellent papers with no real major flaws. But if you got anything less than an A, I'll give you an explanation of what you missed, so you'll know in case you had a question as to what you might need to add to the next paper to get, if you didn't get an A, how to get an A for sure on the second one. And I'll take questions individually on any paper or any grade that you get during the entire semester. Okay, hopefully that helps answer. Any other questions about tonight's lecture or the test? Yeah. Yes. Is that it?
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Yeah. You guys have a good week. And next week we're going to do Islamic arts. Very important subject. And one of those slides definitely will appear on the final. So, all right.
Sounds good, Professor.
Yeah. I
Thank
think
you.
you'll enjoy that. Yeah. And my own slides of Istanbul, which you don't have to take notes on. Okay. You
Sounds
guys,
good.
good evening. You take
All right. See you.
soon next week. Bye. I like the cat image here. That's great. Lazy cats are always fun. Okay. All right. Should pause the recording.